So here we go. Section 1, Turpin Meadows to Eagle Creek. A little bit of an overview of Section 1. I'm going to start at Turpin Meadows. Here's Yellowstone Lake way out here, heading over past Eagle Pass. So if I zoom in a little bit, we start not in the winter as this first section suggests, but we work our way over to the North Buffalo Fork. And eventually, let me zoom back out just a tad. Eventually over to Parting of the Waters and to Ocean Pass, which is right here. So there's the Parting of the Waters, Pacific Creek, Atlantic Creek. And so we headed this way towards the thoroughfare, started to get our first views of the valley, which were just incredible. So we passed Hawks Rest on the right, Bridger Lake, and worked our way up the valley. I should point in, this is Thoroughfare River coming in here on the right to meet the Yellowstone. So we hang a right down here at Mountain Creek. I'll zoom up just a little for a minute so you can see. Here's Yellowstone Lake, just the tip of Yellowstone Lake there. So we cut off a lot of the thoroughfare actually. So work our way up Mountain Creek and up towards Eagle Pass at the boundary of Yellowstone National Park and the National Forest. So up and over the pass, steep downhill to Eagle Meadows, Eagle Creek, all the way along Eagle Creek to the East Entrance Road and the Eagle Creek Campground, where the boys would pick us up and switch hiking partners. And then they drove us just a little bit up the road over here to Pasca Teepee to start the next section. So here we are, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, starting at Turpin Meadows, North Fork Buffalo Trail. And we hiked all day towards the near end of the upper North Buffalo Fork Meadows. And we're feeling pretty good, all things considered, for our first day with full packs. And we walked mostly along pretty heavily horse-impacted trail, but decorated with copious bear tracks, which always makes for an exciting day, and found a campsite that was impacted near the river that evening. And from my journal, I wrote that day, "I'm in the tent, ready for bed. It's only 7:45. Sandhills are calling over the river as they fly past." We spend the next day working our way along the North Buffalo Fork. It's actually called, towards Atlantic Creek. And more bear tracks and beautiful scenery. We did run into several Continental Divide Trail hikers between the trailhead and Parting of the Waters. They were all going southbound, and this was pretty humbling. I asked one of them, oh, so what are you doing, like 20 miles a day? And he said, oh, actually 30. And we were doing about 8 to 12 mile days. So we felt a little humbled by that, especially in the very first stretch of this trip. So just a little detail of To Ocean Pass, which is a place I'd always wanted to see. So here on the divide, this separates the waters into those that flow to the Pacific, and actually it's going that way, Pacific, and then the Atlantic Ocean. We didn't actually go up to the actual Parting of the Waters, but we did walk through this section, which was super cool. So you can see here the little trail going up to Parting of the Waters, a view of Pacific Creek and Atlantic Creek, looking towards the thoroughfare. And as we were walking down Atlantic Creek, we get our first views of the thoroughfare. Eek! So exciting to just see where we were headed. And, descending down to the Yellowstone River was spectacular. It was just an ocean of yellow and green grass and willow stretching from sheer wall to sheer wall on either side of the valley. And to finally see this remote wilderness I've read so much about is just incredible. And it took us about 2 days to get there. And I remember saying to Bianca that, to me, it felt like the first 2 days were getting somewhere, and that now we were actually somewhere. So here's, and that somewhere that we was deep in the willows. Here's Bianca actually on the trail. So not much visibility, and you can bet we made a lot of noise. It was very wet, water flowing everywhere, lots of amphibians and bird life, and the water was flowing even on the trail. This is our route, which was pretty fun. And here you can see Bianca up to her knees walking actually on the trail. And so the thoroughfare, if you're not familiar with it already, touted as the most remote place in the lower 48 states, and encompasses parts of Yellowstone National Park and a designated wilderness in the Greater Teton National Forest. It's remote, it's wild, and very, very beautiful. And so we finally took a rest at the famed Hawk's Rest, which Gary Ferguson talks a lot about in his book. Spent a lot of time down there. And we had lunch and a swim in the Yellowstone, which even this far upstream is pretty wide and pretty deep in spots. And, since we left the Continental Divide Trail the day before, we haven't seen a single soul. So we feel like the only people in the universe. There it is looking north. And I think this bridge was washed out for a few years, but we were super happy that it was there so we didn't have to swim the river, which would have been a big adventure. And we settled that night near Bridger Lake, within easy walking distance of the lake. And I wrote in my journal, "There's a breeze today blowing in the tops of the willows and making patterns with the light on the back of my eyelids as I lay in the grass relaxing after the hike. It's absolutely magical here. Once we left the CDT, we haven't seen a soul until this afternoon. 3 fishermen, a guide, and 2 guys from Macon, Georgia, that were staying at a large horse camp we passed just past Hawk's Rest. The stillness is profound. I can hear gentle wing beats from a group of ducks on the lake, the breeze, and a few horseflies." So the next morning, we wake up, there's a low mist on the lake, and we pack up for what was supposed to be the easy day of only 6 flat-ish miles to our next camp. So here's my journal I sort of jokingly wrote and painted at the end of the day. It was supposed to be an easy day, an easy 6 miles to our campsite, but we actually spent about 3 hours and a few extra miles trying to find the trail from Bridger Lake into the park, which is kind of crazy because there's only like 3 main trails that head into Yellowstone from this part of the world. But there we were walking back and forth and back and forth. We had 3 different maps, a Gaia map, a couple paper maps, and we ended up following Gaia as close as we could to where the trail was supposed to be through thick forest and blowdowns until we finally emerged at a comically large sign in a meadow marking the boundary of Yellowstone National Park. So here's Bianca saying, "Why?" Because there in the background is this crazy large sign when we had just been wandering for hours through matchstick burn wilderness. So anyway, here we are at the border of the park, and I'm super happy to have maintained trails and signs. And we noticed that the willows and the grasses along the trail, they smelled like honey vanilla cigar smoke in the sun. And we stopped for a swim after crossing the Thoroughfare River, where fresh grizzly tracks greet us on the beach, each of us taking turns dunking and cooling off while the other one watches the packs. And so we feel like we're in the middle of nowhere, which we are, and it feels very wild and wonderful. And so after the lack of signage on the Forest Service, we were super excited to see the parks well signed and maintained trails. So if you look at our camera rolls, you'll see we have a bajillion pictures of trail signs on this day. And here you can see we laid the packs, our clothes out on our packs to help them dry after swimming. And so we make it back to the Yellowstone River, and here's what I wrote in my journal. I'm going to keep it real. So I wrote, "Anyway, I'm super exhausted today. My feet hurt like hell after the quote, easy day, end quote, turned into a difficult at least 8-miler, and my feet felt kind of like walking on sawed off stubs. So I'm trying not to beat myself up for being so incredibly tired tonight. It's a few days in and I should not feel this tired, but I am beat. It was excessively hot today. I probably didn't drink enough, and we did have to cross a lot of logs with a full pack and shoes off and on multiple times. So maybe that's all it is. We have 12 miles tomorrow, so let's hope this body can hold itself together Please, please, body, I say. I had hoped we would get stronger, not the other way around, and our pack is much lighter now. We can do this. So finally, we make it to our campsite, and it is stupendously beautiful. A deep, peaceful bend in the Yellowstone with a long gravel bar and a shaded tent and cook area. And despite being tired, we both agree we're not entirely sure if it gets much better than this. The campsite definitely heals my weary body and soul. The water slides by like silk, reflections sliding across the gravel bars in between deep and gentle pools. An after dinner stroll along the river yielded wolf tracks, elk tracks, grizzly tracks, and other discoveries. And every 25 yards or so, there's a path up the bank through the grass and tall willows where it's obvious the animals come and go into the depths of the thoroughfare, weaving back and forth across the bends in the river. At night in the tent, it's the deepest quiet I've ever experienced. It's so quiet, it's as if the silence presses in on itself, making more silence, end upon end, deep and knowing and still, so intense that my ears ring with it, if such a thing is possible. At night, there's not a breeze, not a riffle in the river, nothing but silence. Until 6 a.m., of course, when the red squirrel's alarm on cue. So far, they religiously started chirping right around 6:07 a.m. And in this particular campsite, even the slightest move from us, even in our tents, brought a giant scolding. So off we go, working our way 12 miles along Mountain Creek to Upper Howell Creek. Still lots of bear sign and claws and tracks and beautiful trail past, mountains I'd only ever seen on a map. So we saw only 6 people all day, including 3 guys on trail crew for whom we were really grateful for rerouting a deeply rutted trail. And we settled in at Upper Howell Creek, which is our campsite 5. So after setting up camp somewhere around 9,000 feet in elevation, Bianca and I both take naps with a stiff wind blowing the tents, but keeping the bugs away, which was a definite hallelujah. We had way more mosquitoes than I had anticipated for August, I guess because of the wet winter and spring. And, the sheer walls of the ridge and peak of Pinnacle Mountain rose above us. I could see the head wall from my tent. And taking a walk after dinner, it was sort of hard to fathom the amount of water that must scream through these drainages in the spring. So much snow pouring off these high plateaus and severe faces with a fury unlike anything I could imagine. And camp lies in the shadow of both Eagle Peak and Pinnacle Mountain, and the Absaroka volcanics are just so craggy and austere. And, down here in the valley, the bottom light vanished long ago. But I wrote in my journal as I sit here waiting for the water to filter. I'm watching the last of the sun blush pink on the surrounding ridges. So we wake up early. We're ready for our trek up and over Eagle Pass, the highest point on our trip. That's Eagle Peak in the background. Here we are heading uphill, and we finally make it to Eagle Pass. And so this way we're looking out towards the East Entrance Road, and looking the other direction is Yellowstone National Park. The pass is right on the border. And it was pretty fascinating and humbling looking off into the distance, trying to figure out where I'd be walking next. Dreaming of coming back and maybe hiking Eagle Peak someday. We weren't able to do that on this trip. And definitely celebrating. So far, so good. So then we start the steep descent into Eagle Creek. We've got a cat track, and after we get down a little ways, the rain begins. And here's Eagle Creek Meadows. I'll be honest, today was the first day I asked myself what the heck I was doing. I woke up feeling dizzy and shaky. Could have been altitude sickness, could have been sinus. I had full body aches and a cold sweat. I was bone tired. My feet hurt all the time. And I was low in spirit. So it was a gorgeous hike. I just remembered feeling all day like I wish I didn't hurt so bad. And as I look back in my journal, I found myself wondering if I can do this, or even if I want to, asking myself, isn't a week enough? And feeling feeling down in the woods makes it feel extra down because the woods usually lift me up. So I wrote, I am just wondering if I will get any insight into anything at all on this trip. I'm just so tired. I can't think of much. And I'm always walking and walking. Well, I knew low times would come, and here I am. I kept asking myself, why am I not going home to be with my kid when he's going back to school? Why am I missing a single minute of his youth? Cue the tears. And I kept telling myself, it's only 3 weeks, 21 days. You can do this. So that was a pretty tough day. And we had rain, rain, rain. And on the long hike out from Eagle Creek, just I was struggling on the verge of tears because of my fatigue. I think partly because I was missing my family and excited to see them, and also because we were just so soaked to the bone. There was lots of, willow and currant bushes and other bushes laden with the constant rain that was brushing against our clothes, which were totally soaked through. And, after the second or third creek crossing, we just simply quit taking our boots off. There wasn't much difference between walking the trail and walking through the water and squeezing out the water, squeezing out the seams with every step. And I didn't want to even look at the growing wounds on my feet. I had horrible, horrible blisters that were sort of filled with dirt and grime and getting angrier by the minute. So this is kind of how I was feeling when I hit the wilderness boundary. Not great, but relief was in sight because there were my boys bringing me dry clothes and socks, fresh food, and lifting my spirits. So they drove us to Pahaska Teepee, where the forecast was still rain and more rain. And so instead of hiking the additional 4 miles that we were supposed to go that day, after the changeover, I talked Julianne, my next hiking partner, into staying the night so I could dry my gear and doctor my feet and hopefully renew my spirits.